Life stories. Racist stories unraveled. How a janitor proved everyone wrong with his knowledge. It was midday at Golden Valley High School in Carson City, Nevada. The kind of day where students idly glance at the clock more than the board. The classroom was quiet, aside from the occasional shuffle of feet or the sound of pencils on paper, as Mr. Jacobs, the school's calculus teacher, lectured on integrals. Known for his sharp wit and sarcastic remarks, Mr. Jacobs had built a reputation for being tough but fair. His lessons were dry, and his students, while respectful, didn't really look forward to his classes. The air in the room was musty with the scent of chalk and old textbooks. Phones were tucked under desks, some pretending to pay attention, while others gazed out the windows. The equations on the whiteboard seemed to blur into the background as the students lost themselves in thoughts of what awaited them after the bell. Then, something happened that would shake the whole room. As Mr. Jacobs wrote another problem on the board, a soft squeak echoed from the hallway. Mr. Grant, the janitor, was mopping just outside the classroom, as usual, making his steady progress down the corridor. Mr. Jacobs paused mid-sentence and, with a sly smile, turned to the class. "Well, look who's here," he said, pointing toward the hallway. "Mr. Grant, think you can solve this one for us?" He tapped the board with the back of his marker, like a game show host issuing a challenge. The class chuckled, half laughing nervously, half uncertain if it was a joke they should even be laughing at. They weren't sure if Mr. Jacobs was serious or just poking fun. Mr. Grant, a 54-year-old janitor, stood outside the door with his mop in hand, his forest green uniform slightly faded, with his name, Grant, stitched on the chest pocket. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, he just looked into the room. Then, without a word, he walked in. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned his mop against the wall, and the students all stared at him, unsure of what would come next. Some of them straightened in their seats, expecting him to crack a joke or perhaps just leave. But instead, he walked straight to the front of the class, looked at the board, and calmly asked, "Mind if I give it a shot?" Mr. Jacobs raised his eyebrows. "Sure, go ahead." The phones were out now. One girl whispered to her friend, "Is he serious?" But no one stopped him. Grant picked up the marker and examined the equation for a moment, not out of hesitation, but as if he was assessing a map he had read many times before. He squinted slightly, then started writing. No flourish, no grand gestures, just simple, deliberate strokes, one line after another. The room fell into an eerie stillness. The only sounds were the marker against the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward to get a better view. Mr. Jacobs crossed his arms, watching closely. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened with every stroke. Grant spoke as he wrote. His voice was calm, steady. "This is a chain rule problem, but the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, everything else becomes easier." His pace was steady. He didn't rush. He didn't boast. He just worked, the same way he did with his cleaning tasks, with focus and intent. The students were mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it before. When he finished, Grant capped the marker and stepped back, revealing a perfectly executed solution. The board was filled with neat, precise work. "That's one way to do it," Grant said simply, and for a few moments, no one moved. A junior in the back whispered, "He got it right." Mr. Jacobs' mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His usual sarcasm was gone. He just stood there, silent, staring at the equation on the board. The class was as still as the room itself. No one knew how to react. Grant nodded politely and started walking toward the door, mop in hand, like nothing extraordinary had just happened. As he reached for the door handle, the class remained motionless. No applause, no cheers, just an overwhelming silence. For 10 long seconds, no one moved, as if the room had been pulled out of a dream and dropped into something real. The moment felt almost surreal. And then, someone in the back of the room broke the silence.
Wait, he just did that in his head? It was Sam, a senior who usually didn't speak up unless it was about grades. His eyes were wide, and he blinked, staring at the board as if the answer would change. Mr. Jacobs, still processing what had just happened, muttered, "Well, he got it right," but his usual tone was absent. There was something else there, confusion, maybe even discomfort.
Grant turned back and glanced at the class. "I spent a lot of time with numbers long ago," he said with a small shrug. "They never really left me." A few students laughed, but not at him this time. It was more like the tension had broken, and the class could finally breathe again. Grant walked out, still holding his mop, his shoes squeaking down the hallway as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. As soon as the bell rang, the phones came out. Carly, a junior, had already filmed the entire thing and was editing the clip before class had even ended. By the time the students reached the hallways between periods, the video was already circulating. On Instagram and TikTok, it had a shaky angle, but the caption read, "Our janitor just schooled the calculus teacher." Some laughed, some stared, but the buzz was undeniable. In the teacher's lounge, the conversation was quieter, more subdued. "He did a full derivative problem in his head?" asked Miss Kelly, the physics teacher. "He did," Mr. Clark, the English teacher, replied. "No notes, no hesitation. It was like muscle memory." Mr. Jacobs was at the corner table, pretending to grade papers. He said nothing. Principal Harris had a different reaction. "He's been here for 6 years and no one knew about his academic background?" The buzz grew louder. Lamar Dorsey paused for a moment as Principal Everett's question hung in the air. He had expected small talk, maybe a thank you for his quiet work ethic, or the usual request to clean up some mess. But this was something different. Lamar stood still, his gloves still on, a little damp from cleaning the sinks in the cafeteria. He glanced down at the floor, not sure how to respond. I have a background in engineering, actually," Lamar said, almost in a whisper, like it was a forgotten memory he hadn't touched in years. "Went to college on a full ride, Purdue, mechanical engineering." "Principal Everett, that's impressive. Why are you here then, Lamar?" Lamar shifted on his feet, uncomfortable with the directness of the question. "Life happened," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Things got complicated, and I had to step away. Never really came back to it." He gave a small shrug, trying to dismiss the weight of his past. But there was something in Everett's eyes that made him realize this wasn't just idle curiosity. The principal was genuinely interested. Everett nodded slowly, processing the information. He sat back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "Lamar, if you ever want to come in and talk more about your background, the school could really benefit from someone like you." Lamar didn't know how to respond. He wasn't looking for fame or a new career or some sort of recognition. He just cleaned the school because that's what he had been doing for years. But something about the way Everett said it made him pause. It was like the words had started to slowly chip away at the walls Lamar had built up over the years, walls he'd put up to keep everyone from knowing who he really was. But before he could think too much about it, Everett cleared his throat and added, "I have another question for you, Lamar. Do you have any interest in tutoring?" Lamar blinked, startled. "Tutoring?" "Yeah," Everett said. "I've heard from a few teachers, and I've seen you help the students here and there. I think you could really make an impact if you worked with some of the kids who need a little extra help, maybe with calculus or even just general math. I know it's not your current job, but I think you'd be great at it." Lamar felt his heart beat a little faster. The last thing he wanted was to be put in the spotlight, especially with the students. But the idea of helping those kids, of giving them a chance to understand things the way he once did, it felt like something he couldn't just walk away from. "I haven't tutored anyone in years," Lamar said, still unsure. "I don't know if I'd be able to do it." Everett smiled. "I think you would. You've already helped Wes and the others just by showing them the way. You're good with numbers, Lamar, and more importantly, you understand how to explain them. The kids respect you, and that means something."
Lamar sighed, the weight of the conversation pressing on him. He wasn't ready to let go of his old life. The quiet, simple routine he had now was familiar. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to step out of his comfort zone. He had spent years running from what he could have been. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "I'll think about it," Lamar said finally. "I'll think about it, Principal." Later that afternoon, Lamar returned to his usual routine. The hallways were quieter now as students filed out of their classrooms, the buzz of the earlier excitement beginning to fade. But as he mopped the floors, his mind raced. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Everett, about the way the students had looked at him after the calculus problem. They hadn't seen the janitor, they had seen someone who had knowledge. They had seen someone who was capable.
He was still mopping the cafeteria when a few students gathered outside the maintenance closet. He looked up to see Carly Benson, the junior who had filmed the calculus problem, and Wes Hanley, the senior who had spoken up in class. Carly waved at him as she approached. "Mr. Dorsey," she said, her voice a little shy but filled with excitement, "we've been talking and we think you should really start tutoring." Wes nodded. "Yeah, you made that problem look easy. Could you show me how to do it? I've been stuck on those chain rule problems for a while." Lamar chuckled, feeling that familiar discomfort. "I haven't tutored in years, Wes, but I'll help you out. Let's see what you're struggling with." As they walked into the library after school that day, Lamar began to explain the problem step by step. Wes looked up at him with wide eyes, clearly impressed by how simple Lamar made the explanation sound. Carly pulled out her notebook, taking notes diligently, while Lamar walked them through each part of the solution. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, but Lamar felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. By the end of the session, Wes grinned. "I think I finally get it. Thanks, Mr. Dorsey." "Glad to help," Lamar said with a smile. He glanced up at the clock. "I'll be back here next Tuesday, same time." As the students left, Lamar gathered his things, ready to return to his quiet routine. But as he left the library, he realized that maybe his life had more meaning than he'd ever given it credit for. Maybe he wasn't just a janitor after all. The school would never see him the same way again. The following week, Lamar started his first official tutoring session. Word spread quickly among the students, and more came, eager to learn from someone who not only understood the problems, but cared enough to teach them. The classrooms felt different, and so did Lamar. He wasn't just cleaning the school anymore, he was shaping its future. And for the first time in a long time, Lamar didn't mind being in the spotlight. Lamar Dorsey sat across from Principal Everett, still wearing his janitor's uniform, the faint smell of cleaning supplies lingering on him. He had just shared more of his past than he had in years, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like the weight of his history wasn't just dragging him down, it was grounding him. "You had a full scholarship to Purdue?" Everett asked again, as if he needed to hear it a second time to believe it. His eyebrows were raised in genuine disbelief. "Mechanical engineering? That's no small feat, Lamar." Lamar let out a quiet sigh. "I had plans," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But life, well, life doesn't wait for you." Everett leaned back, his expression softening. "You had the world in your hands. Why did you stop?" Lamar looked down, his eyes tracing the worn grooves in the linoleum floor. "It's not a simple answer." He paused, then began the story he hadn't told anyone in years. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, Lamar had been the oldest of 3 children. His mother, Estelle, had worked long hours at a textile plant to make ends meet. She was strong, resilient, and somehow always found time to read to them after work, making sure they were well educated in a world that didn't offer many opportunities. She always told him, "The world will try to shut the door on you, but if you bring your own key, they can't stop you." Lamar had taken that to heart. He had been a smart kid, always curious about how things worked, motors, pulleys, gadgets, anything he could take apart and put back together. His love for mechanics had earned him a scholarship to Purdue, where he was on track to become the first in his family to graduate from college. As a freshman, he tutored his classmates in calculus, and professors had taken notice. He was excelling in everything he did. But then, in his sophomore year, he got the call that changed everything. His mother had collapsed at work, and the doctor said it was late-stage cancer. By the time Lamar arrived at the hospital, his mother was barely awake. "I can take care of it," she whispered weakly. "Don't come home." But he couldn't stay away. Lamar took a semester off to care for her, then another. He worked night shifts, warehouse jobs, anything to pay the bills. The dream of finishing his degree faded into the background as reality set in. When his mother passed away, Lamar was left with no home to return to, no money to finish his degree, and no guidance on what to do next. "I kept thinking I'd get back to school," Lamar admitted, looking up at Everett. "But life, it doesn't bend to plans. It moves on, whether you're ready or not." After his mother's death, Lamar moved back to Gary to care for his sisters. They were still in high school, barely scraping by. Bills piled up, and the landlord was threatening eviction. Lamar took any job he could get: stockroom loader, janitor at a strip mall, even overnight security at a shipping yard. He did whatever it took to keep the lights on, and school became a distant dream. He had filled out transfer forms, but never sent them. One thing after another kept getting in the way. Then, just as he thought he had a shot at getting back on track, he had another setback. Frank Booker, a man who owned a flooring company in South Bend, had offered him steady work. "You're sharp," Frank said. "Don't waste your time pushing brooms. I'll train you." Lamar had hope again. It felt like a real shot at a fresh start. But the night before he was supposed to start, his youngest sister, Alana, got into a fight at school. It escalated quickly, and Alana had broken someone's nose. The school threatened to expel her, and Lamar had to be there. He missed his first day at the flooring job, and Frank gave the spot to someone else. Another door slammed shut. After that, Lamar stopped chasing dreams. He stopped hoping for something better and started focusing on survival. Years passed, town to town, job to job. Lamar never got into trouble. He worked quietly, doing what was necessary. But the dreams he once had seemed more and more like distant memories. By the time he arrived in Elkhart, Indiana, in his early 40s, Lamar wasn't looking for a fresh start. He was just looking for stability. The school district offered him a steady paycheck, benefits, and summers off. He took the janitor position without hesitation. It was predictable. It was clean work. The students left him alone, and the teachers smiled politely when they saw him. Lamar didn't need more than that. He didn't expect friendship or connection. He kept his head down, did his job, and moved on. But now, things were different. Lamar felt the change in the air. The students no longer saw him just as the janitor. After the calculus problem in Mr. Braddock's class, the students began to look at him differently. They stopped by the janitor's closet just to talk to him, ask for help with homework, even request tutoring. They saw someone with knowledge, someone with answers. One day, after a few students had asked him for help in the hallway, Lamar couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. What if he could do more? What if he could help students not just in small ways, but in meaningful ones? The principal, Everett, had been right. Lamar still had something to offer, something he had buried for years. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was a teacher at heart, and it was time for him to embrace it. "I'm thinking about it, Everett," Lamar said quietly as he stood to leave. "Maybe it's time to bring that old part of myself back. Maybe it's time to teach again." As he walked down the hallway, his mop in hand, Lamar didn't feel the weight of his past dragging him down. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of a future in front of him. He wasn't defined by the mistakes or missed opportunities. He was defined by what he was willing to do next. And that, Lamar knew, was what truly mattered. Lamar Dorsey had always kept to himself. The janitor at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, was the quiet presence who quietly worked behind the scenes, keeping the school spotless while everyone else moved around him, lost in their own lives. At 52, he didn't expect friendships or deep connections. He didn't need them.
His routine was simple: arrive early, clean the halls, leave before the last bell rang. It was the life he had carved for himself. A life of solitude, but it was predictable. And that's all Lamar had wanted.
Then, just as he thought he had a shot at getting back on track, he had another setback. Frank Booker, a man who owned a flooring company in South Bend, had offered him steady work. "You're sharp," Frank said. "Don't waste your time pushing brooms. I'll train you." Lamar had hope again. It felt like a real shot at a fresh start. But the night before he was supposed to start, his youngest sister, Alana, got into a fight at school. It escalated quickly, and Alana had broken someone's nose. The school threatened to expel her, and Lamar had to be there. He missed his first day at the flooring job, and Frank gave the spot to someone else. Another door slammed shut. After that, Lamar stopped chasing dreams. He stopped hoping for something better and started focusing on survival. Years passed, town to town, job to job. Lamar never got into trouble. He worked quietly, doing what was necessary. But the dreams he once had seemed more and more like distant memories. By the time he arrived in Elkhart, Indiana, in his early 40s, Lamar wasn't looking for a fresh start. He was just looking for stability. The school district offered him a steady paycheck, benefits, and summers off. He took the janitor position without hesitation. It was predictable. It was clean work. The students left him alone, and the teachers smiled politely when they saw him. Lamar didn't need more than that. He didn't expect friendship or connection. He kept his head down, did his job, and moved on. But now, things were different. Lamar felt the change in the air. The students no longer saw him just as the janitor. After the calculus problem in Mr. Braddock's class, the students began to look at him differently. They stopped by the janitor's closet just to talk to him, ask for help with homework, even request tutoring. They saw someone with knowledge, someone with answers. One day, after a few students had asked him for help in the hallway, Lamar couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. What if he could do more? What if he could help students not just in small ways, but in meaningful ones? The principal, Everett, had been right. Lamar still had something to offer, something he had buried for years. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was a teacher at heart, and it was time for him to embrace it. "I'm thinking about it, Everett," Lamar said quietly as he stood to leave. "Maybe it's time to bring that old part of myself back. Maybe it's time to teach again." As he walked down the hallway, his mop in hand, Lamar didn't feel the weight of his past dragging him down. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of a future in front of him. He wasn't defined by the mistakes or missed opportunities. He was defined by what he was willing to do next. And that, Lamar knew, was what truly mattered. Lamar Dorsey had always kept to himself. The janitor at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, was the quiet presence who quietly worked behind the scenes, keeping the school spotless while everyone else moved around him, lost in their own lives. At 52, he didn't expect friendships or deep connections. He didn't need them. His routine was simple: arrive early, clean the halls, leave before the last bell rang. It was the life he had carved for himself. A life of solitude, but it was predictable. And that's all Lamar had wanted. That afternoon, the viral video hit the internet. Someone, Carly Benson, a junior, had filmed Lamar's impromptu lesson. She'd uploaded it, not with professional equipment or editing skills, but just a shaky handheld phone camera. The caption read, "Our janitor just smoked the calculus teacher." The video went viral, and within hours it spread across social media: TikTok, Instagram, local news outlets, even regional educational forums. It wasn't mocking Lamar. People were in awe. They marveled at his ability to solve the problem without notes, calculators, or any of the typical classroom resources. People started asking, where did he learn all this? Who is this janitor? Lamar had no idea about the growing buzz. He didn't follow social media. He didn't even own a smartphone. He still used a flip phone, content to live his quiet, simple life. But the world around him was shifting.
The next day at school, teachers paused mid-conversation as he passed by them in the hall. Students looked at him with a strange kind of respect, some even giving him a smile. As Lamar walked past the library, a girl called out, "Hey, Mr. Dorsey, you're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't believe everything you read," he muttered, but the unease gnawed at him. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted to be in the spotlight. Then, as he rounded the corner, Wes Hanley was there with two other students. One of them had a calculus book open, the page marked with a bright pink highlighter. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes asked. Lamar looked around, confused. "You got a free period?" "We made time," one of the other students said. And just like that, Lamar found himself sitting on the floor in the middle of the hallway, explaining a multivariable equation to 3 students. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was meaningful. Lamar wasn't just solving problems, he was connecting with these kids, helping them believe that they could understand the complexities that had once seemed impossible. He wasn't lecturing, he was talking with them, guiding them without making them feel small or foolish. The video had already spread. No one told Lamar about it, but word was out. Soon, other teachers began to notice. The same teachers who had walked past him for years now saw him with a new light, and some even began to join the students during his impromptu sessions. Principal Everett had a conversation with Lamar a few days later. "We've had some requests from the board," he said, "and they'd like to know if you're interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial run. You'd be paid, of course, but it's not about replacing your janitor role, just adding to it."
Lamar felt the weight of the offer. He wasn't sure he was ready to step into the classroom again, but a part of him wondered if he should. For the first time in years, the possibility of teaching, really teaching, was within reach. "I'll think about it," Lamar said quietly. But deep down, he knew this was a moment that could change everything. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was someone who had something to offer. And for the first time in a long while, Lamar felt the fire of possibility rekindling inside him. It wasn't about a title or recognition. It was about the work, the real work. Lamar Dorsey had always been the quiet, reliable janitor at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana. At 52, his life had become one of routine. Arrive early, clean the school, leave before the last bell rang. He didn't expect friendships or recognition, just a steady paycheck to get by. But something had shifted inside him ever since the moment he solved the calculus problem in Mr. Braddock's class. It was as if a spark had reignited the part of him he'd long abandoned, the part that once loved solving equations and dreaming of a life in academia. The students, initially shocked, had started to look at him differently. They had always passed him by without a second glance. Now they stopped to talk, ask questions, even request help with their math homework. It began small, but by the second week, a small group of students had unofficially formed what they called the Dorsey Sessions. They'd meet in the library after school, notebooks open, heads bent, listening intently as Lamar explained math concepts with a clarity no one had expected. And everyone respected it. Even the teachers started taking notice. Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, was the first to approach him after watching one of the sessions. "You've got a gift," she said softly, "and I don't just mean with numbers." Lamar had been surprised, not just by the compliment, but by the realization that others were beginning to see him not as a janitor, but as someone with potential. But it wasn't just the students and teachers who were noticing. The shift was becoming palpable in the school's atmosphere. Not everyone was pleased, however. Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher, had yet to say a word to Lamar since the day in the classroom. When students mentioned his name, Braddock would change the subject. He was clearly irritated, but Lamar didn't let it bother him. He kept his head down, just as he always had, continuing with his quiet tutoring sessions in the library. He didn't ask for recognition or credit, he just wanted to help the students who were seeking his guidance.
The principal, Mr. Everett, had heard the whispers. Students were increasingly speaking of Lamar's math sessions, and it wasn't long before parents began noticing. Some of the calls to the school were complimentary, but one anonymous complaint made its way to the school board. The complaint questioned whether it was appropriate for a janitor to be tutoring students and whether he had been properly background checked to provide instruction. This, of course, set off a storm of tension.
Mr. Everett, however, handled it swiftly. "Lamar Dorsey has been with us for 6 years," he said firmly. "He's an employee of the district, and he has done nothing wrong. If the concern is truly about the tutoring, then I'd expect any concerned party to speak with me directly." The matter was quickly dismissed, but the tension lingered, especially among some faculty members who were unsure how to place Lamar in this new role. They had never seen him as anything more than the man who cleaned the floors. Now he was somehow challenging the very structure they had all been a part of. Still, Lamar persisted. He didn't care about titles or accolades, he simply enjoyed helping the students. One day after school, Principal Everett approached Lamar. "I have a request from the school board," Everett began. "They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial run. We'd pay you for it, but it's not about replacing your janitorial role, it's about adding to it, sharing the knowledge you've clearly still got." Lamar paused for a moment. The idea felt both strange and familiar. He hadn't thought about teaching again, not after all these years. But something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll think about it," Lamar replied quietly, unsure what his decision would be. That evening, as he sat in his small apartment, he pulled an old cardboard box out from under his bed. Inside were his transcripts from Purdue, a worn sweatshirt from his time there, and a photo of him and his mother during his college orientation. He hadn't looked at these items in years, but now they felt heavy with the weight of forgotten dreams. The knowledge didn't fade. It had stayed with him, tucked away in the back of his mind, ready to surface at any time. It wasn't about going viral or being recognized by others, it was about knowing that he still had the ability to make a difference. The following day, during lunch, Carly Benson, the student who had filmed Lamar's viral math lesson, stopped him by the vending machine. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. Lamar smiled faintly. "I wanted to build things. Teach, later, maybe, but life had different plans." "Well," Carly said, handing him a fresh mechanical pencil, "I think you're doing both now." Lamar chuckled softly. He was grateful for the compliment, but it didn't change his core values. He didn't seek fame or recognition, he just wanted to make a difference. Still, the weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. The more attention he received, the more things seemed to shift at Eisenberg High. His students began to see him differently, not just as the janitor, but as someone who could guide them, someone who could teach them something meaningful. But not everyone was thrilled by the changes. As Lamar continued to tutor the students, some parents started questioning his qualifications. One anonymous complaint hit the board, questioning whether a janitor had the right to teach students in a school setting. But Principal Everett defended him, explaining that Lamar was simply helping students and that there was no issue with his background. It wasn't long before Lamar's quiet tutoring sessions began to gain even more attention. One afternoon, as he was explaining integrals to a small group of students in the library, Mr. Braddock walked in. He stood quietly in the back for a while, watching, before finally stepping forward. "Mind if I sit in?" he asked, surprising everyone, including Lamar. Lamar nodded without hesitation, moving aside to give him space. For the first time, Braddock sat and listened. No one said anything, but Lamar knew that something had changed. Even Braddock, who had once been dismissive of him, was now listening. It wasn't about the calculus anymore. It was about respect, something that had been earned, not given. From then on, Lamar continued to teach, continuing his routine of janitorial work while helping his students after school. He wasn't doing it for a paycheck or recognition. He was doing it because he could,
and because he knew that sometimes the biggest impact comes from the most unexpected places. Lamar Dorsey wasn't interested in accolades or titles. As he continued his impromptu tutoring sessions after school at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, he found something far more rewarding than recognition: connection. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply showing up for the students who reminded him of the boy he used to be, the boy who once had big dreams and a passion for learning. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right after the final bell rang, the corner of the library transformed. It was filled with the sound of chatter, students asking questions, flipping through notebooks, and wide eyes glued to the whiteboard as Lamar patiently explained complex math problems they once feared. It wasn't because Lamar had all the answers, but because he made them believe they could find those answers themselves. And that belief, that self-assurance, was what stuck with the students. Isaiah, a freshman who had nearly failed algebra the previous semester, was now solving quadratic equations without panic. Tasha, who had once hated math, was now leading mini study sessions on weekends for her younger cousins using Lamar's notes. He didn't stand in front of them like a traditional teacher, lecturing. Instead, Lamar sat beside them, talking with them, asking questions before answering theirs. Slowly, his humble sessions began to gain traction within the school. More teachers began dropping by, not to supervise, but to learn how Lamar was reaching the students. Miss Lynn, the physics teacher, asked if she could adopt some of Lamar's explanations for her class. Coach Rivera asked if Lamar could help set up a summer prep group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock, the calculus teacher who had once dismissed Lamar, started to stop by regularly. Not every day, but often enough. He'd quietly offer an extra problem or two, and slowly his words of encouragement became a fixture in the sessions. Lamar noticed the shift. The edge in Braddock's voice had softened. He wasn't just challenging the kids anymore, he was listening too.
One day, after the students left the library for the day, Braddock lingered. He walked to the whiteboard, stared at it for a long moment, and said, "You know, I used to think this job made me important. Teaching gave me power." Lamar didn't interrupt. He just let the words hang in the air. Braddock continued, his voice quieter now. "But you've reminded me what it's really about, showing up and making it count." Lamar simply nodded. "We all lose our way sometimes," he said, understanding. He didn't hold grudges. He wasn't interested in being validated or trying to prove anything. He just cared. About a month later, Principal Everett called Lamar into his office. This time, the conversation was different. There was a proposal on the table to formalize Lamar's after-school sessions into an elective class for the following semester. It wouldn't be for credit, just enrichment, a bridge between students and their confidence. "We'll have to jump through some hoops," Everett warned, "but if you're willing." Lamar paused before responding. "I appreciate it, but I don't need the title. I'd rather keep it simple. Let the kids come because they want to, not because it's on a schedule." Everett nodded, understanding. "We'll support you however we can." Meanwhile, Lamar's tutoring sessions began to reach beyond Eisenberg High. Word of his work spread through the school district. One day, a local reporter stopped by to interview him. Lamar kept it short. "No dramatic story, no self-promotion. I'm just showing them what they already have inside," he explained. "Sometimes it takes a little time to see it in themselves." In the spring, Eisenberg High hosted its annual student showcase. There were science projects, art displays, choir performances, and in one corner of the gym, a booth titled Dorsey's Table. Displayed were student-written reflections on math, life, and confidence. Dozens of students had written about how Lamar helped them see more in themselves, not because he gave them answers, but because he listened and believed in them. By the end of the night, no one was asking, "Is he the janitor?" They were asking, "That's Mr. Dorsey, right?" He wasn't wearing a suit. He didn't give a speech. He stood by the table, smiling and thanking the students who came by. Lamar hadn't set out to be seen or recognized, but the students did see him, and that was enough. Later that evening, back at his small apartment, Lamar pulled out the old Purdue sweatshirt from the box under his bed. He didn't put it on. He just folded it neatly and placed it in a new storage bin. He added a folder filled with student thank you notes beside it.
Legacy, he realized, isn't about titles. It's about what you leave behind in others. Lamar didn't need to finish school to teach. He didn't need a degree to lead. All he needed to do was show up every day and care. And that's exactly what he planned to keep doing. As the months passed, the quiet janitor who once went unnoticed was now someone who had quietly changed the lives of so many students. Some of them found their way in math. Some found their way in life. But Lamar knew that he had done what mattered most. He had believed in them when no one else had. Lamar didn't need validation. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His job was to show up. And as long as he kept showing up for those students, the legacy he left would live on in their lives. That was all that mattered to him. This story highlights the powerful lesson that knowledge and potential are not defined by titles or appearances. Lamar Dorsey, a janitor at Eisenberg High, proves that expertise and wisdom can come from unexpected places. Despite his humble role, Lamar's background in mechanical engineering and his quiet, consistent dedication to helping others demonstrates that we all have unique talents waiting to be recognized. The story also emphasizes the importance of showing up, not for recognition, but for the people who need you. Lamar didn't seek accolades or fame, but instead chose to believe in and empower others. By teaching students and inspiring them with his calm, patient guidance, he not only changed their academic lives, but also showed them their own potential. The lesson here is that real impact comes from giving without expectation, and true legacy lies in the positive difference we make in the lives of others. Life is about more than just following a prescribed path. It's about embracing what you can offer, no matter your role, and showing up for those who need you most.
If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover our content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates from our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next videos.